Like the world was too loud, too fast, too much? Like even your own heartbeat was just background noise? Before we begin, if stories like this touch your heart, please like the video, subscribe for more, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from. It means a lot to us. October in Maplewood always smelled like endings. Rotting apples, wet leaves, chimney smoke clinging to the air. Sarah felt it in her bones. She'd moved here 3 months ago, hoping a small town would heal the fractures in her little family. But tonight, as rain tapped against the kitchen window, she wondered if running had just buried the cracks deeper. Her son, Ben, sat at the table, head bent over a spelling worksheet. SNT. He wrote it carefully, tongue poking between his lips. 7 years old, and already he knew too much about silence. About tiptoeing around his father's shouting. About packing his life into cardboard boxes while Sarah whispered, "It'll be better there, baby. I promise." Now, in this creaky rental house with peeling wallpaper, better felt like a lie. Ben flinched at slammed car doors. Jumped when the kettle whistled. His laughter, when it came, was a rare, fragile thing. Sarah's guilt was a stone in her throat. Had she traded one kind of broken for another? That's when she saw him. The cat. He appeared one evening in their overgrown backyard, a shadow among shadows. A tomcat, maybe 2 years old. Thin as a whisper. Mud-streaked gray fur, one ear torn clean through, a pink, jagged scar splitting his muzzle. He moved like smoke, slipping through the tall grass without a sound. But his eyes. Got his eyes. Huge, gold-green saucers, watching Ben swing alone on the rusty swing set. Watching with an intensity that felt human. Sarah left Tuna on the porch step. He'd wait until midnight to creep close, gulping it down in frantic bites, then vanishing before dawn. She named him Ghost, not just for how he disappeared, but for how he seemed haunted. The way he'd freeze at the sound of raised voices, for lifting along his spine. The way he'd stare at the back door, like he wanted to come in, but couldn't. Ben noticed him first. "He looks sad, Mom," he'd say, nose pressed to the glass. "Like me." One rain-slick Tuesday, Sarah found Ghost trembling under their sagging porch. A fresh cut bled above his eye. Animal control? Too risky. The shelter? Overflowing. So, she did the unthinkable. She opened the back door, held her breath, and whispered, "Come inside." He didn't. Not then. But an hour later, soaked and shivering, he slipped through the gap like a draft. Huddled behind the washing machine, a wet, trembling statue, eyes wide with terror. Sarah knelt, placed a bowl of warm chicken broth 6 feet away. "It's okay," she murmured, to the cat, or to herself. "Nobody hurts you here." Ben crept downstairs, pajamas pooling at his ankles. He didn't speak, just sat cross-legged on the cold linoleum, slowly pushing the bowl closer with one finger. Ghost watched, unblinking. The house held its breath. Rain drummed the roof. The dryer hummed. Then, to miracle, Ghost stretched his neck, lapped once, twice. Ben's smile was a sunrise. Quiet, but real. That night, Sarah lay awake, listening. Not to the wind or the leaky faucet, but to the soft thump from Ben's room. She patted down the hall, pushed the door open, just a crack. Moonlight spilled across the floor. Ben slept, one arm dangling off the bed. And there, curled tight against the carpet, just inches from Ben's fingertips, was Ghost. Not hiding, not running, just guarding, as if he'd finally found something worth staying for. Sarah closed the door softly, leaned her forehead against the wood. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. Something had begun. Something quiet and fierce. And neither of them saw the storm coming. The old rental house held its breath in those first weeks after Ghost crossed the threshold. He didn't become a cat overnight. He remained a tremor, a shadow clinging to the edges of their lives. His world was defined by the spaces under things: the couch, the bed, the cluttered desk in Ben's room. He'd emerge only in the deep quiet of pre-dawn, a silent gray wraith padding across the cold linoleum, his single good ear twitching at the groan of the ancient furnace. Sarah watched him. She watched the way he'd freeze mid-step if Ben dropped a spoon, the way his pupils would blow wide and black, a creature braced for impact. It mirrored Ben's own flinches, the way her son would duck his head if a voice rose too loud on TV. Two fractured souls, orbiting the same heavy silence. The connection didn't roar. It whispered. It started with distance. Ghost would curl up beneath Ben's window, a full 6 feet from where the boys sat building Lego castles on the worn rug. He wouldn't look at Ben directly. His gaze was always slightly averted, fixed on the boy's hands, or the shifting pattern of light on the wall. But his body, taut as a coiled spring, was angled towards Ben. Boys. Ben understood distance. He didn't push. He'd sit very still, reading aloud from his dinosaur book, his voice a careful monotone. The Stegosaurus had bony plates along its back. Ghost's torn ear would twitch. Just once. Sarah, pretending to fold laundry in the doorway, felt a tiny fissure open in her own guarded heart. She learned Ghost's language. Not meows, but sighs. A low, almost inaudible exhalation when he finally relaxed enough to sleep. The soft tiddly sound he made with his tongue, like dry leaves skittering, when he saw Sarah open the can of cheap pâté. The way he'd press his entire body flat against the floorboards, belly down, legs splayed, if a delivery truck rumbled too loudly past the house. Survival posture, Sarah realized one rainy afternoon, watching him pancake himself under the coffee table. Just like Ben hiding under his blanket fort during thunderstorms. The guilt she carried wasn't a stone anymore. It was a shroud. Memories pressed in sharp and unwanted. The final, shattering argument with David, Ben's small face pressed white against the banister upstairs. David's voice, thick with bourbon and bitterness. "You're taking him from his home. From me." Her own voice, trembling but resolute. "From this? The yelling? The broken dishes? The fear? This isn't a home." Packing Ben's favorite blue dinosaur, finding it weeks later, forgotten in a box, a leg snapped off. Ben hadn't cried. He just looked at it, then out the window, silent. That silence was the heaviest thing Sarah carried. Ghost carried silence too. The vet, a kind woman with tired eyes, ran gentle hands over his thin frame during the mandatory checkup. "He's been through it," she murmured, tracing the jagged scar on his muzzle. "This is old, probably a dog attack. The torn ear, classic tomcat fight. See how thin the cartilage is here? Malnourished for a long time." She pointed to faint, parallel scars hidden beneath the fur on his flank. Something sharp, maybe caught in fencing, or... She didn't finish. Sarah didn't need her to. She saw the way Ghost trembled, not from the exam, but from the sound of the vet's low, calm voice. He associated human voices with pain, just like Ben associated raised voices with fear. Sarah started talking to him. Not baby talk, just quiet narration. Grocery day Ghost. Lots of cans. She'd place his food bowl down, then step far back, turning her body slightly sideways, less threatening. Rain's coming. Hear that wind? She'd watch his good ears swivel towards the rattling window. Ben has soccer practice later. You'll have the house to yourself. Slowly, glacially, the tremors lessened. He stopped flattening himself quite so dramatically at ordinary sounds. He began to watch her hands, not just her movements, but her hands. When she chopped vegetables, when she turned the pages of a book, when she smoothed Ben's hair at bedtime. Ben's approach was different. Pure, uncomplicated presence. He'd lie on his stomach on the living room floor, coloring, while Ghost observed from the sanctuary beneath the armchair. Ben would push a single Cheerio, bright orange, across the floorboards with his finger, rolling it slowly, deliberately, like a miniature offering. It would stop just at the edge of the shadow beneath the chair. Ben would retreat, resuming his coloring. Minutes would pass. The furnace would kick on. A car would honk outside. Then, a gray paw would snake out. A single hooked claw would delicately snag the Cheerio, dragging it back into the darkness. A tiny, crunching sound. Ben's shoulders would lift, just a fraction, in a silent victory. The sensory tapestry of their fragile new life became richer, deeper. The smell of Ghost was subtle at first, like dusty blankets left in an attic, mingling with the scent of Ben's crayons and Sarah's cheap lavender floor cleaner. Then came the warm, yeasty smell of his breath when he finally dared to yawn in their presence, stretching his scarred jaw wide. The sound of his purr was discovered by accident. Sarah was reading on the couch one evening, a rare moment of quiet. Ben was asleep. Ghost was a dark lump near the cold radiator. Sarah shifted, her book creaked. Ghost startled, but didn't bolt. He watched her, then slowly, deliberate, began grooming the thick fur on his chest. As his rough tongue rasped over his ribs, a sound emerged. Not a smooth motor, but a stuttering, hesitant rumble, like an old engine struggling to turn over on a frosty morning. Purring. Sarah froze, afraid to breathe. The sound was hesitant, fragile, but it was there. A vibration in the quiet room. A tiny declaration of tentative safety. The turning point came on a Tuesday. Sarah was late. A flat tire, a frantic call to AAA, the bus dropping Ben off before she could get home. Her neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a well-meaning but loud woman, had let Ben into the house. "Don't you worry, Sarah. He's fine. Just watching cartoons." Mrs. Gable's voice boomed down the phone. Sarah rushed in, heart pounding with irrational panic. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Ben. No answer. She found him in his room. Not watching cartoons. He was sitting perfectly still on his bed, knees drawn up, staring at the floor. Ghost was there too. Not under the bed. Not even beneath the desk. He was sitting on Ben's rug. About 3 feet away. Staring intently at Ben's socked foot, which was dangling just above the floor. Ben looked up at Sarah, his eyes wide, almost scared. "He won't move, Mom," Ben whispered. "He just looks at my foot." Sarah knelt slowly, mirroring Ghost's stillness. "It's okay, buddy. He's just curious." Ghost's gaze didn't waver from Ben's foot. His tail was still, not twitching, not lashing. Just focused. The furnace kicked on with a rumble. Ghost flinched, his gaze flicking towards the vent, then snapping back to Ben's foot. He took a single, tentative step forward. Then another, closing the gap to 2 feet. Ben held his breath. Sarah held hers. Ghost lowered his head, not in a hunting crouch, but in a slow, deliberate movement. He stretched his neck out, impossibly long, his scarred nose quivering. He sniffed the air an inch from Ben's big toe. Twice. The tip of his pink tongue darted out, quick as a minnow, touching the worn cotton of Ben's sock. Ben gasped, a tiny, startled sound. Ghost froze. His gold-green eyes lifted, meeting Ben's. Not with fear. With the question. Slowly, so slowly it felt like time had thickened, Ben uncurled one finger from around his knee. He extended it, trembling, towards the cat. Not to touch him. Just towards him. An offering. A bridge. Ghost watched the finger approach. He didn't retreat. He didn't advance. He blinked. Slowly. A deliberate, unhurried closing and opening of those huge, watchful eyes. He leaned forward, just a fraction, and pressed the very top of his scarred head, the soft fur between his torn ear and his good one, against the very tip of Ben's outstretched finger. The touch lasted less than a heartbeat. A whisper of warmth, a prickle of coarse fur. Then Ghost was turning, melting back towards the sanctuary beneath Ben's bed, vanishing into the shadows. Ben looked at his finger, then at his mother, his eyes, wide with disbelief, then filling with a light Sarah hadn't seen since before the move, since before the shouting, since before the silence. A fragile, trembling smile touched his lips. "He touched me, Mum," he breathed, his voice barely audible, filled with a... Sarah reached out, not to Ben, but to the space where Ghost had been. The air still held a trace of warmth, the dusty blanket scent. And something else. Something that felt, impossibly, like trust beginning to bloom. She pulled Ben close, burying her face in his hair, inhaling the scent of boyhood and crayons and this impossible, fragile hope. Under the bed, in the deep shadows, there was no sound. But Sarah imagined, just maybe, she could feel it. A faint, hesitant vibration in the floorboards. A stuttering purr echoing the sudden, fierce beating of her own heart. 5 days straight. It wasn't the gentle October drizzle anymore, but a relentless, drumming downpour that turned the backyard into a swamp and seeped a damp, earthy chill into the old house's bones. The constant gray outside the windows seemed to amplify the quiet inside, making every creak of the floorboards, every gurgle of the drain pipe sound unnaturally loud. Ghost's world, slowly expanding since that first touch, suddenly contracted. It wasn't fear of them. Sarah was sure of it. He'd begun venturing further into Ben's room, sometimes even sprawling on a patch of afternoon sun near the foot of the bed, his stuttering purr a comforting counterpoint to Ben's quiet play. He'd even started weaving cautiously around Sarah's ankles in the kitchen at feeding time, a silent, shadowy figure brushing warmth against her leg for a fleeting second. But the rain changed him. Or rather, it revealed something hidden. It started subtly. Ghost would be following Ben down the narrow hallway towards his bedroom, padding silently behind. When Ben would turn into his room, Ghost would stop, dead, at the threshold. Not just pause, but freeze. His body low, tail rigid, the fur along his spine lifting just slightly. His gold-green eyes, usually so watchful, would fixate on something inside Ben's room, not on Ben himself. He wouldn't enter. He'd retreat, back to the living room, or vanish under the couch. Sarah noticed it once, then twice, wrote it off as the cat being skittish about the storm's noise. Then Ben mentioned it. "Ghost doesn't like my closet," he said casually one evening, poking at his peas. Sarah paused, fork halfway to her mouth. "His closet? What do you mean, honey?" Ben shrugged, a gesture learned too young. "When I go to get my pajamas, he watches the door. He won't come in if it's open. Curiosity, a low, persistent hum, started beneath Sarah's ribs. She began watching. Whenever Ben opened his closet door, even just a crack, Ghost reacted. If he was in the room, he'd flatten himself, belly to the floor, ears pinned back, eyes wide and fixed on the dark rectangle. If he was outside the room, he'd appear silently in the doorway, a sentinel staring into the gloom beyond Ben's rumpled clothes and scattered toys. He never hissed, never growled, just fought, with an intensity that felt heavy, almost oppressive. Maybe it smells funny to him? Sarah suggested one night, trying to sound light. As Ghost refused to enter Ben's room after bath time, his gaze locked on the slightly ajar closet door. Old houses, damp corners. But she didn't believe it. This felt different. Deeper. Older. Like Ghost wasn't just wary, he was warned. The closet itself was unremarkable. Sarah had checked. Just Ben's clothes, a stack of board games, a forgotten box of her own winter sweaters smelling faintly of cedar. No rodents. No damp patches on the walls. Just space. Dark, ordinary space. Yet to Ghost, it was clearly territory marked with invisible danger. It coincided with a shift in Ben. The fragile light that had sparked in him after Ghost's touch began to flicker. He came home from school quieter, more withdrawn. His Lego creations, once sprawling, ambitious cities, became smaller, enclosed structures, walls built high. He started leaving his uneaten apple slices in his lunchbox, something he hadn't done since the first terrifying weeks after leaving David. "How was school, buddy?" Sarah would ask, her voice carefully neutral, scraping burnt toast into the sink. "Fine," Ben would murmur, eyes fixed on Ghost, who was once again positioned like a small, gray sphinx, staring at the closed closet door from across Ben's room. "Anything fun happen?" A shrug. "Nope." Sarah knew that shrug. It was the armor plating he'd worn during the worst of David's rages. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was thick with something unsaid. Her own guilt, the ever-present shroud, tightened around her. Had she failed him again? Was Maplewood just another place where shadows gathered? The external conflict arrived, not with a bang, but with a crumpled note in Ben's backpack. Sarah found it while fishing out a permission slip for a field trip. It was torn from a cheap notebook, the handwriting blocky, aggressive. "Ben smells like cat pee. Cat pee boy. Go home freak." Ice flooded Sarah's veins. She recognized the name scrawled at the bottom. Mason. A boy from Ben's class, mentioned only once before, weeks ago. "He pushed me off the swing," Ben had mumbled, then clammed up. Sarah had chalked it up to a one-time playground squabble. Now, seeing the malice in those jagged letters, she felt sick. She confronted Ben gently that night, the note held loosely in her hand. He was sitting on his bed, Ghost a tense presence beneath it, unusually close to the side facing the closet. "Ben? Honey, did Mason give you this?" Ben's face crumpled. Not into tears, but into a mask of pure, wretched shame. He nodded, eyes squeezed shut. Does he do things like this a lot?" Another nod, barely perceptible. "He calls me Cat Pee Boy," Ben whispered, his voice thick. "He says Ghost is a ugly rat, and I smell like him, and nobody wants to sit by me at lunch anymore." The air left Sarah's lungs. The carefully constructed piece of their little world, the fragile trust blooming between her son and this broken cat, felt like it was cracking. Bullying. The word echoed in the silent room. Not just teasing, but targeted cruelty, exploiting Ben's quiet nature, his visible connection to a scarred animal. Exploiting ghost. "Why didn't you tell me, baby?" Sarah's voice cracked. Ben just shook his head, mute again, retreating behind the walls Sarah thought they'd started to dismantle. He curled onto his side, facing the wall, pulling his blanket over his head. Sarah sat frozen, the hateful note burning her fingers. What could she do? Call the school? Would it make it worse for Ben? Confront Mason's parents? What if they were like David? The helplessness was suffocating. That's when Ghost moved. He didn't emerge from under the bed, but Sarah heard it. A low sound, unlike anything he'd made before. Not a purr, not a sigh. A soft, almost inaudible rumble, deep in his chest. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated through the floorboards Sarah sat on. A sound of pure, primal warning. Her eyes snapped to the closet door. It was closed. Ghost wasn't looking at Ben or at her. His eyes, gleaming in the dim light filtering under the bed, were fixed, unblinking, on the closet door. That deep, unsettling rumble continued. A sound Sarah felt more than heard. A vibration against her palm where it rested on the floor. It wasn't directed at her. It wasn't directed at Ben. It felt ancient, protective, and fiercely, terrifyingly focused on the unseen space beyond that door. As if the closet, or something he associated with it, had just become the enemy. Sarah's gaze darted from Ghost's intense stare, to the closet door, to the crumpled note still clutched in her hand. "Cappy boy. Go home, freak." The damp chill of the rainy house suddenly felt sharper, more sinister. Ghost's unexplained aversion. Ben's sudden withdrawal. The cruel note. They weren't separate threads. They were tangling together, tightening into a knot of tension that pulled at her heart. Ghost's low rumble faded, leaving a silence that hummed. He didn't take his eyes off the closet. Ben was a small, silent mound under his blanket. Sarah sat on the floor, the note a cold weight, staring at the scarred cat under the bed, staring at the door he feared. What did Ghost know? What was he trying to guard Ben against? And how could a closet, a simple, ordinary closet, feel suddenly like the mouth of a gathering storm? The question hung, thick and unanswered, in the rain-lashed dark. The fragile peace was over. Something, or someone, had crossed a line. And the quiet cat, who had learned the language of flinches and silence, was preparing to answer. The rain didn't stop. It hammered the roof, a relentless drum roll, turning the world outside into a blurry, gray watercolor. Inside, the air felt thick, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. The crumpled note lay on the kitchen counter, a venomous little serpent coiled in the dim light. "Cappy boy." The words pulsed in Sarah's vision every time she closed her eyes. Ben moved through the house like a ghost himself, pale, silent, retreating further into himself. He avoided his room, lingering instead in the living room, drawing the same small, walled fortress over and over on scraps of paper. Ghost mirrored his tension. He shadowed Ben constantly now, a low-slung, gray sentinel, but his vigilance had a new edge. His gold-green eyes rarely left the hallway leading to Ben's room and the closed closet door beyond. That low, unsettling rumble vibrated in his chest more often, a constant, subaudible warning Sarah felt in her bones. Sarah felt fractured. Helpless rage warred with crushing guilt. She'd called the school, spoken to Ben's teacher, Mrs. Ellis, a woman whose voice held weary resignation. "Mason, yes. We're aware. We're addressing it. We have a zero-tolerance policy, Ms. Evans." The words felt hollow, bureaucratic, useless against the raw shame etched on Ben's face. Addressing it? What did that mean? Did it stop the whispers in the lunchroom? The deliberate bumps in the hallway? The way Ben flinched when someone said cat? She tried talking to Ben, gentle probing reassurances that felt flimsy even to her own ears. Mason's wrong, honey. Ghost is beautiful. You're brave. So brave. Ben would just nod, eyes distant, tracing the scar on Ghost's muzzle with his gaze. The connection she'd fought so hard to build felt paper-thin, ready to tear under the weight of a bully's words. Friday afternoon arrived, sodden and grim. Ben trudged off the school bus, head down, shoulders hunched against the downpour. Sarah met him at the door, her heart sinking at the mud spattering his jeans, the tear in the knee she knew hadn't been there that morning. Ben. He pushed past her wordlessly, dripping onto the worn hall rug. Ghost materialized instantly, pressing his body against Ben's trembling legs, emitting that deep, protective rumble, his eyes fixed down the hall. What happened, baby? Serena, ignoring the wet, reaching for him. Ben shook his head violently, tears finally spilling over, mingling with the rain on his cheeks. You pushed me into the mud. By the bike racks, he choked out. He said. A sob racked his small frame. He said he was gonna come here and hurt Ghost. He said he'd make him run away, or worse. Pure, paralyzing ice shot through Sarah's veins. The threat. Not just words tossed in a schoolyard, but a deliberate, targeted threat against the fragile creature who had become their silent anchor. Against Ben's only friend. The helplessness vanished, incinerated by a mother's white-hot fury. She pulled Ben close, holding him tight, feeling his small body shake. He won't touch Ghost, she whispered, her voice raw, fierce. I promise you, Ben. He won't come near him. But the fear in Ben's eyes, the absolute terror, mirrored the dread coiling in her own gut. Maplewood was small. Their street wasn't hidden. What if Mason did come? The doorbell rang. A single, shrill note that shattered the tense silence. Ben froze, eyes wide with terror. Ghost, pressed against Ben, let out a sound Sarah had never heard, a sharp, startled yowl, half fear, half warning. His entire body went rigid, his gaze laser-focused, not on the front door, but down the hallway, towards Ben's room, towards the closet. Stay here, Sarah breathed, her own heart hammering against her ribs. She walked to the door, peering through the rain-streaked peephole. Not Mason. Mrs. Gable, their well-meaning but oblivious neighbor, stood hunched under a giant polka-dotted umbrella, holding a dripping casserole dish. Sarah. Just wanted to drop this off. Beef stroganoff. Thought you could use a hot meal in this dreadful weather. Her voice boomed through the wood. Relief, sharp and dizzying, washed over Sarah. She opened the door a crack, forcing a smile, accepting the dish with numb fingers. Thank you, Mrs. Gable, that's so kind. Small talk ensued about the rain, the leak in Mrs. Gable's sunroom, the unruly hedge between their properties. Sarah nodded, murmured response, her eyes constantly flicking back to Ben, still frozen in the hallway, Ghost a tense statue beside him, still staring down the hall. Mrs. Gable finally left, her cheerful echoing in the sudden quiet as Sarah closed the door. She leaned against it, taking a shaky breath. False alarm. Just Mrs. Gable. Then she heard it. A sound that wasn't rain. Not Mrs. Gable's retreating footsteps. A sharp, mocking whistle, coming from the side of the house. From the direction of the backyard. Followed by a boy's voice. Loud, deliberately pitched to carry through the rain. Here, kitty kitty. Ugly rat cat. Come on out, Cat P Boy's stinky friend. Mason. Sarah's blood turned to fire. She lunged for the back door. Ben's cry of, "Mom, no," ringing in her ears. She wrenched it open, stepping out onto the slick porch. The backyard was a quagmire. Rain lashed down, blurring the figure standing near the sagging fence, near the overgrown bushes where Ghost had first appeared. Mason. A bulky, red-haired boy in a sodden hoodie, a cruel smirk twisting his face. He held a long, pointed stick, poking at the bushes. Come out, wherever you are, flea bag," he jeered. "Get off my property." Sarah, the sound tearing from her throat, primal, furious. She took a step forward, onto the rain-slicked grass. Mason just laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Make me, Cat P lady." He jabbed the stick deeper into the bushes. "Where's your stupid?" A blur of gray shot from the open back door, past Sarah's legs, so fast it was almost invisible against the driving rain. Ghost. He didn't hesitate, didn't slink, didn't hide. He flew across the muddy yard, a low, silent streak, heading straight for Mason. But not to attack him. He planted himself, square, between Mason and the bushes he'd been poking. His body was low, coiled, every muscle taut. His torn ear lay flat against his skull, his good ear swiveling wildly. His scarred muzzle was pulled back in a silent snarl, revealing sharp, surprisingly white teeth. But it was his eyes. His gold-green eyes, wide, unblinking, blazing with a ferocity Sarah had never imagined could exist in the timid creature who hid beneath beds. They were fixed, not on Mason, but on the bushes behind him. A low, guttural growl erupted from his chest, even more terrifying than any sound he'd made before. A sound that vibrated through the rain, a primal challenge. Mason froze, the smirk vanishing, replaced by startled confusion. "Stupid cat," he muttered, but his voice lacked its earlier bravado. He raised the stick half-heartedly. "Ghost, come back." Ben's voice, high-pitched with terror, screamed from the doorway. Ghost didn't flinch, didn't look back. His entire being was focused, radiating a protective fury that made the rain itself seem to hesitate. Sarah saw it. Movement in the bushes behind Mason. Not from Ghost's direction, but deeper in the tangled foliage near the Gables property line. A shifting shadow, low to the ground. Then another. Two large, muscular shapes emerged from the dripping leaves, fur plastered dark and wet to powerful bodies. Brindle coats, blocky heads, eyes that glinted with a feral intensity. Mrs. Gable's pit bulls, Duke and Tank, notorious for digging under fences, now loose in the storm. They didn't bark. They didn't growl. They simply advanced, heads low, shoulders rolling, moving with a terrifying, silent purpose. Straight towards Mason, who stood with his back to them, mesmerized by the snarling cat in front of him. Sarah's scream died in her throat. Time slowed, crystallized by the pounding rain. She saw Mason, finally sensing the danger behind him, start to turn, his face paling. She saw the lead dog, Duke, muscles bunching, preparing to lunge. She saw the stick fall from Mason's nerveless fingers. And she saw Ghost, the small, scarred cat, facing two animals 10 times his size, who embodied the terror that had haunted his entire existence. He didn't run. He didn't cower. He exploded. With a yowl that split the storm, a sound of pure, undiluted defiance. Ghost launched himself. Not at Mason. Not away from the dogs. Directly at them. He moved like liquid fury, a gray meteorite aimed at the lead dog's face. His claws, sheathed for months in their quiet home, were fully extended, gleaming like tiny, curved daggers in the rain. He hit Duke's broad muzzle like a guided missile, a whirlwind of teeth and claws and snarling rage. The impact was sickening. Duke roared, a sound of shock and pain, staggering back, shaking his massive head violently, trying to dislodge the small, clinging demon. Momentarily confused, lunged towards the flailing mass of dog and cat. Mason stumbled backwards, tripped, landed hard in the mud, scrambling away with a choked cry of terror, forgotten by everything except his own survival. Sarah was moving, running towards the chaos, screaming Ghost's name. Ben's wails echoing behind her. Ghost! Ghost! Ghost held on. He was a blur of gray against the brindle fur, biting tongue, raking his hind claws down Duke's shoulder. Duke bucked, slammed sideways into the fence, trying to crush the cat against the wood. Ghost twisted, somehow avoiding the crushing impact, but losing his grip. He hit the mud, rolled, instantly back on his feet, fur-plastered dark, blood mixing with the rain on his muzzle, his eyes still blazing, still fixed on the dogs. Tank lunged, a gaping maw aimed at Ghost's spine. Sarah was still yards away, helpless, frozen in horror. Ghost didn't try to dodge. He turned, impossibly fast, and met the charge. He leaped, not away, but up, straight into the dog's descending face. His small body collided with Tank's jaw, claws raking across the dog's eyes. Tank yelped, high-pitched and surprised, recoiling, pawing frantically at his face. It bought seconds. Precious seconds. Sarah reached them, grabbing a fallen tree branch, swinging it wildly, screaming with a voice she didn't recognize. Get back! Get away from him! She swung the branch, connecting hard with Duke's flank as he tried to regroup. He yelped, turning his snapping jaws towards her. Next door, lights blazed on. Mrs. Gable's frantic voice cut through the storm. Tank. Oh God, no! The back door slammed open. The dogs, startled by Sarah's attack, confused by the lights and shouting, hesitated. Duke snarled at Sarah, then looked towards his frantic owner. Tank was still pawing at his stinging eyes. They turned, abandoning the fight, and bolted back towards the hole under Mrs. Gable's fence, vanishing into the rain. Silence crashed down, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain, Ben's terrified sobs from the porch, and Mrs. Gable's hysterical cries. Sarah dropped the branch, her legs trembling. She scanned the muddy battlefield, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. Ghost? Ghost! He was there, a small, dark shape, lying motionless, half submerged in a muddy puddle near the fence. Sarah stumbled towards him, falling to her knees in the muck. Ghost, oh God, Ghost! He wasn't moving. Rain plastered his fur flat, revealing the stark lines of his ribs, the jagged scar on his muzzle standing out lividly. Blood, dark against the gray, seeped from a gash on his shoulder, mingling with the mud. His eyes were closed. Sarah reached out a shaking hand, terrified to touch him, terrified not to. Ghost, please. A tremor ran through him. A tiny, almost imperceptible shudder. Then slowly, his gold-green eyes opened. They were clouded with pain, but clear. Alive. He blinked, slowly, laboriously. His gaze, unfocused at first, drifted past Sarah's tear-streaked face, past the chaos, towards the porch. Ben stood there, Mrs. Gable's arm around his shoulders, his face white, tears streaming down his cheeks. Ghost! He whispered, The sound ripped from his soul. Ghost's eyes locked onto Ben. The faintest flicker, a spark, ignited in their depths. He tried to lift his head, a weak, convulsive movement. But his tail, lying limp in the mud, gave a single, feeble twitch. Just the tip. A tiny, trembling signal. Sarah scooped him up gently, cradling his muddy, broken body against her chest. He felt frighteningly light, fragile as a bird. His breathing was shallow, rapid. But his head rested against her arm, his eyes, heavy-lidded now, still fixed on Ben, who was running towards them through the rain, Mrs. Gable shouting after him. "He saved me," Mason's voice, small, taken, came from the side. He was standing a few feet away, covered in mud, eyes wide with shock, staring at the cat in Sarah's arms. He jumped at the dogs. They were gonna get me. Sarah didn't look at him. All she saw, all she felt, was the tiny heartbeat fluttering against her own, the warm weight of the creature who had faced his deepest terror, not for himself, but for the boy who had offered him a single Cheerio in the darkness. For her boy. She held Ghost closer, bending her head, her tears mixing with the rain on his battered fur. "I know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know he did." The invisible walls she'd built, the shroud of guilt, shattered, washed away in the rain, leaving only this raw, terrifying, beautiful. The rain stopped at dawn. Not gradually, but all at once, as if a celestial faucet had been twisted shut. Silence flooded the house, thick and fragile, broken only by the drip, drip of water from the gutters onto the porch below. Sarah sat on the bathroom floor, her back against the cold tub, Ghost's broken body cradled in her lap. All night, she'd held vigil, pressing clean towels to his wounds, whispering nonsense, feeling the faint flutter of his heartbeat against her palm like a trapped moth. Blood, mud, and the sharp, medicinal tang of antiseptic hung in the air. Ben slept fitfully on a nest of blankets beside them, one small hand stretched out, fingertips just brushing Ghost's damp tail. His face, even in sleep, was etched with the terror of the storm, the sight of his cat flying through the rain towards monsters. The emergency vet had been blunt over the phone, voice crackling with static in the storm's aftermath. Critical. Internal injuries likely. Bring him immediately if he stabilizes, but prepare yourself. Ghost hadn't stabilized. His breathing remained shallow, labored, a wet, clicking sound deep in his chest that made Sarah's own lungs ache. Moving him could kill him, so she stayed, holding the pieces of him together, willing her own strength into his small, battered frame. "Stay," she whispered. The word of prayer, the command, the plea. "Just stay." Sunlight, pale and tentative, began to creep across the bathroom tiles. It touched Ben's face first. He stirred, blinking awake, his eyes instantly wide and fearful. He scrambled upright, his gaze locking onto Ghost. "Is he?" "He's still fighting," Sarah whispered, her voice raw from exhaustion and unshed tears. "Feel." She gently guided Ben's hand to Ghost's chest, beneath the makeshift bandage on his shoulder. Ben held his breath, his small fingers trembling. Then, a tiny movement, the faintest rise and fall. "He's breathing, Mom." Ben's whisper was filled with awe, as if witnessing a miracle. Ghost's eyes opened, just slits, clouded with pain, but open. They drifted, unfocused, until they found Ben's face hovering above him. A soft sound escaped him, not a purr, not a sigh, but a tiny emma, weak, questioning. Ben burst into tears. Quiet, hiccuping sobs that shook his small shoulders. He buried his face against Ghost's unharmed side, careful, so careful not to jostle him. "You came back," he wept, his voice muffled against the damp fur. "You brave, stupid, wonderful cat." Ghost blinked, slowly, laboriously. Then, with an effort that seemed to cost him dearly, he lifted his head, just an inch, and nudged Ben's cheek with his cold, scarred nose. A single, deliberate touch. The choice unfolded quietly, inevitably. Sarah called the vet again as sunlight strengthened, describing the shallow breaths, the weak movement, the impossible fact that he was still alive. "Bring him," the vet said, a new note of cautious hope in her voice. "If he's lasted this long, he might just have a chance." The car ride was agony. Every bump in the road, every turn, drew a tiny whimper from Ghost, bundled in clean towels on Ben's lap. Ben held him like glass, whispering constant reassurances, his tears dripping onto the towels. "Almost there, brave boy, my brave Ghost." The vet clinic smelled of bleach and anxiety. Ghost vanished behind swinging doors on a gurney, leaving Sarah and Ben in a sterile waiting room filled with the low murmur of worry, the whine of a small dog, the ticking of a clock that sounded unnaturally loud. Ben pressed his face against Sarah's shoulder, silent now, trembling. Sarah stared at a poster about flea prevention, seeing only Ghost's eyes blazing in the rain, his small body hurling itself against impossible odds. The vet emerged hours later, her scrubs stained, her face etched with exhaustion, but her eyes held a spark of relief. "He's a fighter," she said simply. "Broken ribs, a punctured lung, deep lacerations requiring stitches, severe bruising. But he's stable. The lung is the biggest concern, but we've drained it. He's on oxygen, antibiotics, pain management." She paused, looking at Ben, who was listening with rapt, terrified attention. "He's not out of the woods, but he wants to live. That's half the battle won." Ben's breath hitched. "Can I see him?" They were led to the intensive care ward. Ghost lay in a clear oxygen crate, looking impossibly small, swathed in bandages, and 4 taped to his front leg. His eyes were closed, his breathing a rhythmic hiss and click aided by the machine. But his chest rose and fell. Steadily. Ben pressed his palm flat against the clear plastic. "Hey, Ghost," he whispered, his voice thick. "You did it. You're gonna be okay." Ghost's ear twitched. Just the torn one. Then, slowly, his gold-green eyes opened. They found Ben's face, pressed against the crate. The faintest vibration, almost invisible, trembled through his bandaged chest. The ghost of a purr. Life in the old rental house shifted. The constant tension, the weight of Ben's silence, the unnamed dread associated with the closet, didn't vanish overnight. But it softened, transformed. Ghost came home a week later, a shaved patchwork of stitches and bruises, moving with the stiff, painful caution of an old man. He had a new scar now, a thick, jagged line bisecting the old one on his shoulder. The vet called it a battle badge. Ben called it awesome. The cat who had lived under beds now claimed the sunniest spot on the living room couch, a throne of folded blankets. He didn't hide. He held court. Ben did his homework sprawled on the floor beside him, reading aloud again, his voice growing stronger. The Tyrannosaurus Rex had the strongest bite of any land animal ever. Ghost's purr, no longer stuttering, was a deep, resonant rumble, a contented engine. Sarah noticed the changes, subtle but profound. Ghost no longer froze at the sound of the closet door opening in Ben's room. He'd lift his head, watch with calm interest as Ben rummaged for clothes, then settle back down. The invisible threat, whatever he had sensed, seemed appeased. Had it been the dogs all along, their presence seeping through the shared fence line? Or had facing them, conquering his deepest terror, finally banished the ghosts in his own mind? Ben changed too. The shadows in his eyes didn't disappear, but they receded. He came home from school one afternoon, a week after Ghost's return, holding a slightly crumpled drawing. It showed a small gray cat standing defiantly in the rain, facing two large, blurry brown shapes. Above it, in wobbly letters, "My cat Ghost is a hero." Mason drew it, Ben said, a tentative pride in his voice. "He gave it to me," said Ghost saved him. Mason hadn't apologized. Not in words. But the bullying had stopped. A silent understanding, forged in mud and rain and the fierce courage of a scarred cat. Routines deepened, infused with new meaning. The nightly ritual wasn't just feeding anymore. It was Sarah carefully checking Ghost's stitches, applying antiseptic, while Ben held the cat's head steady, whispering praise. "Good boy, brave boy, almost done." Ghost would endure it, his eyes half closed in trust. The scarred muzzle, once a symbol of fear, became a map of survival Ben traced with gentle fingers. Sarah watched them, her son and his cat, bathed in the golden light of late October afternoons. The guilt, the heavy shroud, hadn't vanished. She still saw David's furious face, still heard the crash of breaking dishes, still felt the weight of Ben's broken dinosaur in her hand. But the stone in her throat had dissolved, replaced by a profound, aching gratitude. She hadn't just rescued a cat. The cat had rescued them. He'd fought their monsters, absorbed their fear, and shown them the ferocious strength hidden within vulnerability, within trust. One evening, as the first frost painted delicate feathers on the window panes, Sarah sat on the couch. Ghost, healed enough to move with his old liquid grace, jumped up beside her. Not at her feet. Not on the other end. Right beside her hip. He turned a circle, once, twice. Then settled, pressing his warm, solid weight against her leg. He looked up at her, his gold-green eyes clear, utterly present. Then he laid his head on her thigh, his purr vibrating through her bones, a deep, contented thrumming. Sarah's breath caught. He'd never chosen her lap. His devotion, fierce and silent, had always been for Ben. This was different. A quiet acknowledgement, a sharing of the burden and the peace. She rested her hand on his back, feeling the ridge of scars beneath his thick fur, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Outside, the last of the autumn leaves, vibrant red and gold, finally let go, drifting silently to the frost-kissed earth. Endings and beginnings. The fear hadn't disappeared. The past hadn't vanished. But in the quiet warmth of the room, with the purring cat pressed against her, and Ben's soft snores drifting down the hall, Sarah Evans felt something she hadn't felt since long before Maplewood, before David, before the fracture. She felt winter settled over Maplewood like a held breath. Snow muffled the world, transforming the muddy battlefield of the backyard into a pristine, silent expanse. Inside the old rental house, warmth radiated not just from the struggling furnace, but from the quiet, hard-won peace that had taken root. Ghost, his fur slowly regrowing over the jagged scar on his shoulder, moved with a new, deliberate dignity. He was no longer just a survivor, he was a veteran, his bearing reflecting the weight of the storm he'd weathered. His vigilance remained, but it was softer now, a watchfulness born of earned security, not constant fear. He patrolled the perimeter of Ben's room, the living room couch, Sarah's feet as she cooked, his kingdom secure. Ben's laughter returned, a sound less fragile, more resonant. He talked about school, not about Mason, who now gave him a wide, almost odd berth, but about a project on ancient Egypt, about a new friend named Leo who shared his love of dinosaurs. He still carried shadows, moments where his gaze would turn inward, a familiar flinch tightening his shoulders at a sudden noise. But the paralyzing silence had receded. He spent hours on the floor beside Ghost's couch throne, building intricate Lego landscapes, narrating epic sagas where a small, scarred warrior cat defended a kingdom against towering foes. Ghost would watch, his purr a steady bassline to Ben's imaginative tales, occasionally reaching out a paw to gently bat a stray brick. Sarah found herself breathing easier. The crushing guilt hadn't vanished, but it had shrunk, put into perspective by the fierce, purring creature who had fought for her son. She tackled the lingering physical remnants of their upheaval, the boxes still stacked in the spare room, relics of their rushed escape from David and the life that had fractured. One frosty Saturday morning, fueled by a sudden surge of determination, she pulled down the last, heaviest box marked Ben Miscellaneous. Dust motes danced in the weak winter sun slanting through the window. Inside were outgrown sweaters, a collection of smooth river rocks Ben had cherished years ago, and, tucked at the very bottom, something unexpected. Not Ben's. A small, battered cardboard box, sealed with brittle yellowed tape Sarah didn't recognize. Her name wasn't on it. Curiosity, a quiet hum she hadn't felt in years, stirred. She carefully peeled the tape away. Inside, nestled in tissue paper gone brittle with age, lay two things. The first was a snow globe. Cheap plastic, the kind sold at gas stations decades ago. Inside, a tiny ceramic kitten, painted a faded gray, sat beneath a miniature evergreen tree. Fake snow, yellowed with time, drifted slowly when Sarah turned it over. A memory, sharp and sudden, pierced her. Ben, maybe 4 years old, mesmerized by a similar globe in a drugstore window during a rare outing with David before things turned dark. "Kitty in the snow, Mama." "Safe kitty," he chirped, his small hand pressed against the cold glass. David had scoffed, pulled him away. Sarah, juggling groceries and dwindling hope, had filed the moment away under small heartbreaks. She'd never bought it. The second item was a thin sheaf of papers, clipped together. Not official documents. Photocopies, slightly blurred. At the top, a header, Maplewood County Animal Shelter, intake and medical record. Below it, a name that stopped Sarah's breath. Guardian. Guardian. Her eyes scanned the sparse details. Intake date, roughly 2 years ago. Found, emaciated, injured, lacerations muzzle, torn ear, wandering near industrial park outskirts. Estimated age, 8 to 12 months. Temperament, extremely fearful / non-aggressive. Medical notes, treated for parasites, malnutrition, wounds cleaned / sutured. Attempted socialization, minimal progress. Adoption status, long-term holding / sanctuary candidate. Then a final, handwritten note scrawled in the margin. Too scared for adoption floor. Responds only to quiet, patient handler, Marge. Shows odd protectiveness toward injured kitten in adjacent cage. Potential? Heart's in there, buried deep. Dr. Evans. Dr. Evans. The vet who had saved Ghost after the dog attack. The same tired eyes, the same gentle hands. She'd known. She'd seen him before, named him. Guardian. Sarah sat back on her heels, the cold floor biting through her jeans, the snow globe heavy in one hand, the photocopied records trembling in the other. Guardian. The name resonated, deep and true, echoing the silent sentinel who had watched over Ben from the shadows, who had faced down dogs not for territory, but for a child. He hadn't just become a guardian when he met Ben. He'd been one all along. His fierce protectiveness toward that injured kitten in the shelter, a glimpse of the heart buried beneath layers of fear and survival. His refusal to enter Ben's room when the closet was open. Had he sensed the looming threat of the Gable dogs through the shared wall? Smelled them? Felt the vibration of their restless movements? His fear hadn't been irrational. It had been a warning system honed by violence, tragically misunderstood. The pieces clicked into place with an almost audible sound. His initial wariness, the survival flinches mirroring Ben's, the deep rumble of warning that vibrated the floorboards, not random fear, but a guardian's radar pinging danger. He hadn't chosen Ben randomly. He'd recognized a kindred spirit in need of guarding. Ben, the boy who flinched at loud voices. Ghost, the cat who associated human sound with pain. Two fractured souls speaking the same silent language of survival, finding in each other not just companionship, but a sacred duty. Sarah traced the photocopied name with her finger. Guardian. He'd never answered to it with them. He'd chosen Ghost, a name whispered in the dark, a reflection of how he saw himself, a specter, barely there. But Sarah knew now. His true name was etched not just on this faded paper, but in the scar on his shoulder, in the way he positioned himself between Ben and the world, in the quiet rumble of his purr as he watched over his sleeping boy. Later that afternoon, Ben found her sitting on the living room floor, the snow globe and the papers spread before her, Ghost resting his chin on her knee, his eyes half closed in contentment. Sarah patted the space beside her. Ben sat, immediately reaching out to stroke Ghost's head between his ears, the gesture ingrained, instinctive. "Look what I found, bud," Sarah said softly, her voice thick. She handed him the snow globe. Ben's eyes widened. He turned it over, watching the ancient fake snow swirl around the tiny gray kitten under the tree. "It's like Ghost," he breathed. "A safe kitty in the snow." He looked up at Sarah, a question in his eyes. "Where did it come from?" "It was in one of the old boxes," Sarah said. "But I think it was always meant to be yours." She picked up the shelter papers. "And I found something else. About Ghost." She showed him the intake sheet, pointing to the name. "See? Before he found us, the shelter people called him Guardian." Ben's lips moved silently, forming the word, Guardian. He looked down at the cat, who opened his eyes fully, gazing back with calm, gold-green depth. "That's his real name, isn't it?" Ben whispered, not a question, but a realization. "He was always that, even when he was scared." Sarah nodded, tears pricking her eyes. "Yeah, buddy. He always was." Ben carefully set the snow globe down. He wrapped his arms around Ghost's neck, burying his face in the thick fur around the cat's shoulders, avoiding the scar, a gesture of ingrained tenderness. "Thank you, Guardian," he murmured, his voice muffled. "For finding us." Ghost rumbled, a deep, resonant purr that vibrated through both of them. He nudged Ben's cheek with his scarred nose, the same gesture of reassurance he'd given in the bathroom after the storm. The circle felt complete. The lost snow globe wish for a safe kitty, finally delivered. The nameless stray revealed as a guardian all along. The gift wasn't just the snow globe, a tangible echo of a forgotten childhood wish granted years late. It wasn't just the knowledge of his true name, uncovering the core identity buried beneath trauma. The final gift was understanding. The profound revelation that Ghost's fierce, selfless act in the rain wasn't an anomaly born of desperation, but the ultimate expression of who he fundamentally was. He hadn't just protected Ben, he had finally, fully, become his own true name. Guardian. A name whispered not in fear, but in awe, by the boy he'd shielded with his broken, magnificent heart. Ben kept the snow globe on his nightstand. The shelter papers, Sarah carefully placed in a drawer, a sacred relic of a past life that had shaped the guardian who now purred on their couch. Ghost, hearing his true name spoken softly by Ben in quiet moments, would blink slowly, his gaze steady and sure. He knew. The invisible walls were gone. He wasn't Ghost, the shadow. He was Guardian found. And his watch, for this small, scarred family, would never end. Years have a way of softening sharp edges. The frantic terror of that rain-lashed afternoon, the agonizing vigil in the antiseptic-scented bathroom, the raw ache of seeing Guardian broken in the mud, these hadn't vanished from Sarah's memory. But time, and the steady, purring presence that anchored them, had woven those threads into the fabric of their lives, transforming trauma into testament. They no longer lived in the creaky rental. A small, sturdy cottage with sun-drenched windows and a fenced garden stood on the edge of Maplewood now, bought with Sarah's promotion earnings and a fierce determination to plant roots where love, not fear, could grow. Winter surrendered to a gentle spring. Crocuses pushed brave purple heads through thawing earth in the garden Ben tended with quiet focus. Guardian, his fur fully regrown over the thick, rope-like scar on his shoulder, moved with a serene authority that belied his rough start. He was no longer just Ben's shadow, he was the household's silent patriarch. His favorite perch was the wide windowsill in the sunny kitchen, where he could survey his domain, the bird feeder Ben kept stocked, the safe stretch of grass, the back door through which Ben bounded home from school. His vigilance remained, but it was the watchfulness of contentment, of knowing precisely what he protected and why. Ben, at 10, carried himself differently. The flinches were rarer, the withdrawn silences replaced by thoughtful observation. He still loved dinosaurs, but his Lego creations now sprawled across his bedroom floor, open landscapes, not walled fortresses. He had friends. Leo came over often, and Ben spoke of others. Maya, who loved horses, quiet Eli, who shared his fascination with bugs. He still carried the weight of his past, moments where a slammed car door or a raised voice on TV would make his shoulders tense, his gaze flicker momentarily inward. But the paralyzing dread was gone. He knew, bone deep, that he was safe. He had faced monsters, both human and canine, and found an unwavering ally in a scarred gray cat. One drizzly April afternoon, Sarah found Ben sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, Guardian stretched luxuriously beside him, one paw draped possessively over Ben's ankle. Spread before them were not Legos, but the slightly yellowed shelter intake papers and the cheap plastic snow globe. Ben was carefully polishing the globe with the hem of his t-shirt, making the faded gray kitten and the yellowed snow shimmer faintly. "Looking at Guardian's old stuff?" Sarah asked softly, sinking down beside them. The scent of warm cat fur and the faint cedar smell clinging to the old papers filled the space. Ben nodded, not looking up. He traced the photocopied name, Guardian, with a reverent finger. "Sometimes I forget," he murmured, his voice thoughtful, "that he was ever so scared, that he had a whole life before us, where people called him this, but he was still alone." Guardian lifted his head, sensing the shift in Ben's tone. He nudged Ben's hand with his cold nose, a silent inquiry. Ben immediately scratched the special spot behind his torn ear, eliciting a deep, rumbling purr that vibrated through the floorboards. He wasn't alone in the way that mattered, Ben, Sarah said, her gaze fixed on the cat whose eyes, half closed in bliss, held the profound peace of belonging. Not really. The vet saw it. She called him Guardian because she saw his heart even when it was buried under all that fear. He protected that little hurt kitten in the shelter cage, just like he knew, somehow, he was meant to protect you. Ben picked up the snow globe, turning it slowly. The tiny kitten sat eternally safe under its miniature tree. I wished for a safe kitty, he said, his voice barely a whisper. That day at the store. I wished so hard. And Dad said no. He looked at Sarah, his eyes clear, free of the old shame. But you found him. He found us. He found us, Sarah corrected, her throat tight. Just like we found him. When we were all a little lost. She thought of the boxes, the guilt, the suffocating silence. He didn't just fight off those dogs for you, Ben. He fought for us. For this. She gestured around the warm, cluttered, lived-in room, Ben's drawings pinned to the fridge, Guardian's favorite blanket draped over the armchair, the scent of baking bread drifting from the kitchen. He showed us how to fight for it. The message wasn't loud or preachy. It settled into the quiet room like dust motes dancing in a sunbeam. It was in the way Guardian, sensing Sarah's emotion, stretched and deliberately walked across Ben's lap to butt his head firmly against Sarah's arm, purring louder. It was in the way Ben leaned his head against her shoulder, a gesture of uncomplicated trust he hadn't offered spontaneously in years. It was in the understanding that flickered in Ben's eyes, not just about the cat, but about his mother's journey, her own battles fought in the quiet hours. Courage, Sarah realized, watching the rain trace silver paths down the window pane, wasn't always a roar. It wasn't just the explosive fury of a small cat hurling himself at monsters in the rain. Sometimes, it was the quiet persistence of a child offering a Cheerio in the dark. Sometimes, it was a mother opening a door to a trembling shadow, whispering, "Nobody hurts you here." Sometimes, it was simply the act of trusting again after the world has taught you not to. It was letting the scars show, not as marks of defeat, but as maps of survival. It was choosing every single day to believe in safety, in connection, even when the memories whispered otherwise. Guardian's greatest gift wasn't the heroic act itself. It was the after. The quiet certainty he brought into their lives. The way his steady purr became the heartbeat of their home. The way Ben's laughter, once so fragile, now echoed with genuine joy. The way Sarah could look at the snow globe, that symbol of a denied childhood wish, and feel not sadness, but a profound gratitude for the infinitely more precious, living, purring wish that had been granted. He had guarded Ben's body from harm, yes. But more importantly, he had guarded Ben's spirit and Sarah's hope, giving them the space and the safety to finally heal. The rain outside gentled to a soft patter. Ben carefully placed the snow globe back on the shelf where it lived, beside a framed photo of him and Guardian asleep on the couch, the cat's paw resting on Ben's arm. Guardian, satisfied that all was well in his kingdom, jumped down and padded towards the kitchen, casting a backwards glance, a silent command for dinner. "Come on, Mom," Ben said, scrambling up. "Guardian's hungry. We can't keep the hero waiting." There was a lightness in his voice, a teasing affection that spoke volumes. Sarah followed, pausing in the doorway. She watched Ben scoop kibble into Guardian's bowl, the cat weaving figure eights around his legs, his purr a familiar, comforting engine. Sunlight, weak but persistent, broke through the clouds outside, catching the dust motes and the silver threads starting to show in Sarah's hair. She breathed in the scent of damp earth, warm cat, and the promise of bread. The fear hadn't disappeared. The past was still a part of them, etched in Ben's occasional stillness, in the ridge of scar tissue beneath Guardian's fur, in the memory of broken things. But it no longer defined them. They had faced the storm. They had found each other in the wreckage. And they had built something new, something strong and quiet and fiercely loved, on the foundation of a small gray cat's indomitable heart. Guardian finished his kibble and looked up, his gold-green eyes meeting Sarah's across the sunlit kitchen. He blinked slowly, deliberately. A silent benediction. A guardian's satisfied gaze. Sarah blinked back. A silent thank you. A mother's peace. Outside, a robin sang, clear and bright, heralding the enduring, stubborn beauty of beginnings. End of story. If Ghost's journey from a trembling shadow to Ben's fierce guardian touched something in your heart, if you believe in the quiet miracles rescued animals bring into our lives, then this story is yours too. Please, like this video if it reminded you of the unexpected heroes who find us when we need them most. Subscribe for more real, raw, and deeply moving stories about the extraordinary bonds between animals and humans. We share new tales of courage, healing, and hope every week. Tell us in the comments below, where in the world are you listening from? And have you ever been chosen by a rescue animal? We read every single story you share. Your words inspire us. Hit the bell icon to get notified the moment we post our next video. You won't want to miss these powerful true stories. Because sometimes, the bravest heart, the most loyal guardian, comes wrapped in the most unexpected package. And their love changes everything. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing in second chances. See you in the next story.